Hello, my fairies. Welcome to my nighttime fairy forest, and today I thought I would read a little more about fairy lore. So I found this website called The Stranger's Bookshelf, and it had some information about the fairy realm. So the first part is going to be about the fairy realm, and then the second part is about the dark fairy folklore. And both parts are very short, so this video shouldn't be too long. So grab some tea, put on your pajamas, get relaxed, and explore the fairy realm with me. And both of the readings that I am narrating today were written by Karen's Folklore Tidbits. When we think of the word fairy, which means realm or enchantment, we conjure up images of young humanoid wing-like creatures that are very ethereal and are blessed with magical powers. The fairy is also considered an air spirit, almost transparent to the eye and light as a dewdrop. Their realms are magical places where humans should not tread. In most folklore tales, they are portrayed as more earthly creatures than heavenly. Fairies are sometimes linked with romantic tales, such as in the works of Shakespeare and Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory. The majority of stories revolve around protecting oneself from their mischief and malice, or in medieval romances, as one of the beings that a knight-errant might encounter. Fairies in various forms go as far back as Greek mythology, where they were portrayed as nymphs and sirens in Homer's The Odyssey. The majority of the older fairy origins were believed to date back to pre-Christian beliefs in gods and goddesses. In medieval times, they were depicted as the stealer of women and children. The women were spirited away and made to nurse fairy children, and in due course, a mirror image of the woman was left behind. When the fairy folk stole children, they would leave behind a changeling, which in European folklore describes the offspring of a fairy, elf, or other legendary creature that was left in place of a human child. It was also believed this was made up to account for various deformities and unusually sick children that were encountered during this period. In Puritan times, the fairies were considered demons, and anyone said to be consorting with fairies would be tried as a witch and punished. Often categorized as supernatural or preternatural, the best read on this subject is by renowned folklorist Robert Kirk, a Gaelic scholar best known for his treatise called The Secret Commonwealth. He was highly acclaimed in the subject of fairy folklore, and his collection of supernatural tales are considered to be an important work in the field, highly recommended. The fairies are said to have the ability to move between the seen and unseen worlds, becoming invisible at will. Signs of fairy realms were the presence of rings, of mushrooms, or toadstools, which was said to appear after the fairies danced in delight in a circular motion. An ideal fairy environment would be woodland areas. They loved and worshipped the great oaks, which was said to enhance their magical abilities. Tree hollows were also a sign of the fairy presence. Adding rose quartz stones would attract these creatures to your gardens. It was also, though, that if there was also the presence of a pond or shallow pool in your garden, it would attract them as well. Toadstools would act as the perfect resting places for fairies. Placing small, shiny stones by the pond made in perfect places for them to relax. Having lots of flowers and shrubbery in your garden were also ideal, as this would also attract butterflies, which the fairies love. It was also thought that the adding of a small pebble pathway would help ensure that the fairies do not lose their way. Interestingly enough, the book titled The Case of the Cottingley Fairies by Joe Cooper tells the story of two cousins who claim to have interacted and photographed fairies. The environmental conditions were almost exactly the same as depicted in many books. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was willingly convinced that these fairy spirits were real and that it was not a hoax. This was never really proven, as the photo editing back then was not really heard of, and many puzzled that if it was a hoax, how was this done? This book is worth reading as it's very entertaining. Let us know what you think about the case of the Cottingley fairies. Was it real or a hoax? So what did you guys think of this first reading? Do you believe in fairies? Did you pick up on the components of the fairy garden, and does that seem familiar to some of you guys? Because I have seen plenty of beautiful pictures of beautiful fairy gardens, and I have seen the toadstools, and sometimes they have like a little bird pond, and I have also seen the pebble walkways, and I have heard of people putting crystals in their fairy gardens. So what did you guys think of that? Do you guys have fairy gardens at home? And if not, would you like to make one day? I'm gonna move on to the next story, and this story is darker. It's about the dark fairy realm, so we'll see if they talk about evil fairies, like more mischievous fairies. I'm very interested in dark folklore, so I think this will be interesting. In the last chapter of Fairies of the Realms, we talked about the introduction to the fairy realm and what sort of environment they live in. This week, on our Fairies of Realms special, we would like to introduce you to the Dark Fairy Realm. Dark fairies, or unseelie court. In Scottish folklore, there were two types of fairy: the seelie court, which consisted of unpredictable, mischievous fairies, and the unseelie, which were vicious and liked to hurt humans for fun. The name unseelie originated in Scotland and is now universally recognized to categorize the dark fairies. A lot of unseelie tales were recorded in medieval times. There were tales of unseelies in human form that would lure unsuspecting men and women into the woods with a luring embrace. Once kissed by a human, that person would be trapped into 7 years of servitude in the fairyland realm. During these encounters, many withered and died before they could be taken away, as their powers were so great that the faint of heart simply died from shock. If one was tricked and actually married one of these tricksters, as they were masters in mimicking human form, they would eventually have their life essence stolen. Once a human had been lured to the fairy realm, they would spend years there in human time, but in fairyland, it would only be a matter of days. When they were finally sent back or managed to escape, the person would turn into a haggard elder or immediately disintegrate into a pile of dust. There was a fairy legend that said the unseelie court could take on various forms of the dead. If a human stared too long at one of these dark fairies, they would resemble the images of dead relatives. Some believed that unseelies and fairies as a whole are unpredictable spirits. It has also been suggested that they were demoted angels. Folklore legends say that when the angels revolted in heaven and God closed the gates, the fairies were trapped between heaven and hell. Because they were not evil enough for hell, they went into hiding and were able to study our creatures of earth and take on human and animal forms at will. The unseelie court were the malevolent and evil of the dark realms. Some could even spread wings and roam the earth, stealing mortals and causing harm to everyone that they encountered. Some examples of these dark beings that are mentioned in various folklore tales are the redcaps, vicious fairies that would drench their caps in human blood. In English folklore, Black Annis was another evil fairy, a blue-faced witch with iron claws that would reach into open windows and snatch children away to later devour them. Finally, in Greek mythology, the Dryads were a devilish fairy clan of mountain forest dwellers. They stole people's property and would steal away their women and children. These fairies were the children of the great oaks and pines and popular trees. Their lives were very closely entwined with the trees and the forest. And should the tree die, the fairy would also die. Dryads were featured in the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, fighting alongside Aslan the Great Lion. Many charms would repel these fairies from your door, such as hanging cold iron charms, especially an iron horseshoe. which was said to be very poisonous to unseelie fairy folk. Hence, they would stay far away. Various herbs had the same effect. The rowan bush, which is a small deciduous bush bearing fruits, also acted as a talisman against these pranksters. For recommended reading on the darker side of fairy lore, I have listed some great reads below. Please take a look at Jacob's English Fairy Tales. Definitely an enjoyable read packed with lots of strange tales. So what did you guys think of the darker fairy lore? For me, it creeped me out a little bit. I thought that the unseelies they seem very creepy and you don't want to mess with them. But I'm the type of person who likes to get creeped out. The horror genre is my favorite book and movie genre. So I love reading scary stories and watching scary movies. And I especially like the scary mythical creatures like sirens and fairies. But tell me what you guys think in the comments section below. And have a good night, fairies!